Prime Minister Mark Carney says the Canada-China relationship is at a turning point after meeting with President Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the summit.
Prime Minister Carney and President Xi mean for Canada's fraught relationship with China and for Carney's ambitions to diversify trade.
Prime Minister Mark Carney is signaling a new approach this morning. We have images from Carney's meeting just a few hours ago with Xi Jinping on the sidelines of the APEC summit.
By the fall of 2025, a fierce confrontation between President Donald Trump and Canadian Prime Minister Mark Carney had grown into something much larger, a pivotal moment in global power. What began as a dispute over tariffs soon evolved into a global realignment. The White House's efforts to pressure Canada through trade restrictions and economic coercion were meant to reassert American dominance, but they instead drove U.S. allies toward new partnerships. Canada began deepening ties with Asia, Europe reopened its channels with Beijing, and Japan strengthened its resource links with China. A quiet but profound shift was underway, one that could redefine the global balance of power for decades. The rupture came suddenly in early October. Trump halted all trade negotiations with Canada after a satirical commercial from Ontario mocked his tariff policies. Ottawa refused to respond with outrage. Instead, it pivoted strategically. Within days, Prime Minister Carney's team was en route to Asia, where high-level meetings included a discreet discussion with Chinese President Xi Jinping. For Canada, this was not a sudden turn but an overdue adaptation. Years of escalating tariffs on steel, autos, and lumber had strained industries and pushed consumer prices higher. Washington's message was unambiguous. Even its closest allies would be treated as competitors. Recognizing this reality, Carney sought to expand Canada's reach beyond North America and reduce its economic dependence on the United States. Critics at home warned that turning toward Asia could backfire, suggesting Canada was trading one difficult partner for another. But Carney's move was less about ideology and more about survival. When the largest economy in the world begins closing its markets, a mid-sized nation must seek alternatives or risk decline. And Canada was hardly alone in this recalibration. Across Europe and Asia, governments long anchored to Washington were reconsidering their loyalties. The White House's sweeping mid-2025 tariffs, ranging from 25 to 35% on key imports, shook the foundations of global trade. European leaders reopened talks with Beijing to safeguard critical supply chains. Japan expanded mineral exports to China through new port agreements in Yokohama and Dalian, while South Korean manufacturers, heavily reliant on U.S. buyers, signed multi-billion-dollar deals with Chinese electronics firms. Ironically, all three regions had recently signed trade frameworks with Washington, the European Union in August, Japan in September, and South Korea in October. Yet few expected those agreements to last. Trump's habit of canceling or suspending negotiations overnight left allies uneasy and uncertain about their economic futures. For many, China was not a preferred partner but a necessary fallback, a safety net against American unpredictability. The America First agenda rested on economic pressure. Through tariffs and renegotiated trade deals, Trump sought to bring manufacturing home and enforce U.S.-centric rules of commerce. In the short term, the approach delivered political wins. Factories reopened across the Midwest, and job reports celebrated rushing successes. But diplomacy built on coercion breeds instability. When Trump severed trade talk with Ottawa over a television ad, it sent an unmistakable signal. Access to U.S. market could hinge on personal whims. For decades, America's influence stemmed from consistency, NATO's security umbrella, USMCA's integrated market, and the G7's coordinated leadership. Replacing predictability with volatility reshaped the behavior of allies. They continued to value access to the American consumer base, but they no longer trusted the framework governing it. Beijing was quick to exploit the opening. By late September, China's Ministry of Commerce reported a 12% rise in trade with Western nations compared to the previous year, despite heightened tensions with Washington. Canadian export data mirrored the trend, showing growing shipments of agricultural and energy products through Pacific ports in British Columbia, primarily destined for Asian buyers. To China, this was a straightforward opportunity. The more erratic Washington appeared, the more appealing Beijing's stability became. Yet for Western nations, the calculation was far more delicate. China offered growth and vast consumer access, but at the cost of deepening reliance on a geopolitical rival that dominated railroads and maintained tight control over foreign investment. This new order was not built on shared democratic values, but on necessity, economic survival. not ideology, drove the shifting alliances. For Ottawa, the challenge was balancing pragmatic adaptation with national principle. Carney knew the risks. Canada still remembered the fallout from 2018, the arrests of Michael Kovrig and Michael Spavor, and the punitive trade measures that followed. Moving closer to Beijing risked reopening old wounds and inflaming public skepticism. Yet clinging to the old model dependence on the U.S. meant accepting stagnation and strategic vulnerability. The task was to diversify intelligently, broadening markets without sacrificing autonomy. When Trump's administration froze relations, Ottawa refrained from retaliatory tariffs or inflammatory statements. Instead, Carney's government advanced a long-term trade blueprint, a $300 billion expansion plan focused on emerging Asian markets. Talks began with the Philippines under the ASEAN framework, with other nations soon to follow. The vision was clear: build resilience through diversification rather than dependence. Canada's trade priorities no longer revolved around securing Washington's approval, but around identifying genuine opportunity, places where its goods could move freely and partnerships could thrive without constant political interference. Observers describe Carney's approach as calm and methodical. Where Trump governed through confrontation, Carney emphasized patience and quiet calculation. His restraint during the diplomatic fallout won him credibility abroad. In a world dominated by volatility, Canada presented itself as a steady hand, a partner open to dialogue, grounded in fairness, and committed to predictable policy. Even Beijing recognized the distinction. Chinese state media described Carney's leadership as rational and disciplined, a subtle acknowledgement of Canada's growing influence in a reshaped global economy. The broader consequences of Trump's trade strategy reached far beyond North America. America's allies were no longer moving in lockstep. The G7 cohesion was fraying, and the idea of Western unity was giving way to a patchwork of regional arrangements designed to hedge against U.S. volatility. The world that once revolved around Washington's economic and political stability was quietly evolving into a multipolar system, one defined not by ideology but by flexibility and self-preservation. By late 2025, the global economic map looked markedly different. Trade flows had shifted eastward, new partnerships were forming, and the once unshakable confidence in American leadership had eroded. The confrontation that began with a satirical ad in Ontario had triggered far-reaching effects, transforming a regional dispute into a global reckoning. Canada's pivot to Asia symbolized a broader truth. When great powers turn inward, others will inevitably look elsewhere. Whether this marks the beginning of a world built without America, or simply a recalibration of its role, remains uncertain. But one thing was clear by the year's end: the age of unquestioned U.S. dominance in global trade was coming to an end, and a new, more unpredictable order was taking its place. China no longer viewed Canada as a proxy of Washington, but as an independent actor open to mutual benefit. Meanwhile, the broader consequences of America's tariff policies were becoming impossible to ignore. The U.S. Chamber of Commerce and the World Trade Organization both warned that prolonged tariffs were driving up consumer prices and destabilizing global production networks. By October 2025, U.S. inflation had risen close to 5%, with vehicle and energy costs leading the surge. At the same time, China's share of global manufacturing reached 31%, its highest in 5 years. Across Europe and Asia, trade routes were being quietly restructured to reduce exposure to American unpredictability. This shift did not signal that the West was cutting ties with Washington. It reflected an effort to build alternatives in practice. This rebalancing translated into a visible shift. More Chinese investment in European infrastructure, increased Canadian grain exports moving through Pacific shipping lanes, and Asian corporations buying stakes in Western resource ventures. The global economy was no longer built around a single center of gravity. Trump viewed his tariffs as tools of discipline, a way to pressure allies into alignment, but the effect was the opposite. Rather than tighten Washington's control, his measures pushed nations to diversify their economies, creating new trade networks that reduced dependence on the United States. What began as a campaign to reinforce American dominance had evolved into the catalyst for a new global order, one where China's economic influence expanded across territories once considered firmly within U.S. reach. For Canada, outreach to Asia was not a betrayal but a pragmatic adaptation. Europe's engagement with Beijing did not represent loyalty, but survival. Every policy decision, every new partnership, stemmed from a single motivation: stability in an uncertain environment. And the more the United States turned inward, the more its partners sought to look outward. Trump's approach to trade had always rested on confrontation. From the moment he returned to office, his administration unleashed a sweeping tariff regime. 10% on most imports and a punishing 50% on Canadian metals. The logic seemed simple: drive production back to American factories and force allies to accept U.S. terms. Early headlines praised the plan, citing modest gains in domestic output and job numbers. But as 2025 unfolded, the costs began to surface. The very policies designed to pressure Ottawa were now hurting American consumers. Inflation accelerated, supply chains buckled, and manufacturers voiced mounting frustration. The harder Washington pushed, the clearer it became that the United States and Canada were far more economically intertwined than the tariffs allowed. Behind closed doors, even senior members of the administration began to admit what the data made undeniable: the U.S. could not isolate itself from its closest neighbor without inflicting harm at home. It was in this environment that Prime Minister Mark Carney revived one of the most polarizing topics in modern North American politics: the Keystone XL pipeline. The mention alone was enough to command attention. For more than 15 years, Keystone had symbolized a divide between energy policy and environmental priorities. Barack Obama canceled the project in 2015. Trump resurrected it during his first term. Joe Biden shut it down again on his first day in office. By 2025, even the developer, TC Energy, had walked away from it entirely. Most believed the project was permanently dead. Carney did not propose restarting construction. Instead, he used Keystone as a signal, a quiet but deliberate message about Canada's leverage. His point was clear: Canada's energy resources were not mere export but integral components of continental infrastructure. A revived pipeline could provide the United States with a secure alternative to unstable foreign suppliers, while giving Canada's energy-rich provinces a much-needed outlet for production. It could relieve economic pressure in Alberta and create space for renewed cooperation between Ottawa and Washington. For Trump, who styled himself as a champion of U.S. energy independence, the proposal struck a resonant political chord. If he embraced it, he could claim credit for restoring a major project. If he rejected it, he risked appearing to favor costly, volatile imports over reliable Canadian supply. Carney's maneuver was subtle but strategic.